have a pretend fight with someone and then something happens in the middle of it and it suddenly turns real and you end up crying in the storage cupboard under the stairs? Yes, that scene that happened with you and your sibling when you were kids also happens with grown men and women, trained professionals no less, in the professional wrestling ring, minus the storage cupboard. It doesn't occur too often, but when fantasy and reality meet in the squared circle, it is absolutely fascinating, and typically there is an interesting story to go behind the argy-bargy. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestling matches that turned into real shoots. Join us. Number 10, Rick Steiner and Eric Stevens versus Vordell Walker and Dustin Rhodes. Both Steiner brothers had fearsome reputations for roughing up their opponents, whether they were working in tag or singles matches. The big bad booty daddy's hair trigger temper and ability to fly off the handle is well documented, but the dog-faced gremlin also has quite the mean streak in him. That was on full display in the dying days of WCW when he separately beat up Conan, Kwee-Wee, Lash LaRue, and Hugh Morris in matches. Years after the death of WCW, Rick was at it again and attempted to shoot on independent wrestler Vordell Walker in a tag bout that also featured Eric Stevens and Dustin Rhodes. According to reports, Steiner kicked Walker twice and tried to take him down to the mat, but didn't bank on his far more inexperienced opponent being trained in combat fighting. Vordell was able to easily turn the tide, but the match completely fell apart and the two had words backstage afterwards. Supposedly, Rick had refused to pre-plan anything with Walker earlier in the day and later admitted to trying to rough the kid up a little. When their paths crossed at an indie show a couple of years later, they got into another scrap, which resulted in police being called. Number 9, John Tenta versus KOJI KITAO. John Tenta, better known as WWE's Earthquake, and KOJI KITAO, a temperamental former sumo star who had been seen as something of a bad boy in his native Japan, had worked together without incident on a co-promoted WWE/Super World of Sport show in the Tokyo Dome on March 30th, 1991. 2 nights later, however, on April Fool's Day, something went very wrong and their match completely fell apart right from the off. It was obvious that the two were not cooperating, with Tenta using his massive frame to immobilize KITAO, grabbing a waistlock before taking him down to the mat. A visibly annoyed KITAO rolled to the outside to grab a breather before attempting to hurl a table into the ring. Come on, mate, it's not the table's fault. They then attempted a test of strength spot when KITAO tried to slap on an arm lock only to be swatted away. KITAO then tried the old "I'm gonna remove your eye with my finger" routine before petulantly kicking the ref and getting DQ'd. Figuring why quit while I'm ahead, KOJI then grabbed the mic and told everyone in the arena that wrestling was fake and he had refused to lose as scripted before being escorted away and leaving the business for a little bit. A bad night at the office. We've all had them. Number 8, Perry Saturn versus Mike Bell. I don't think I'd mess with Perry Saturn, former bouncer and army ranger who was built like a brick you-know-what house, but to be fair to Mike Bell, the unfortunate opponent who suffered Big Pez's wrath during what should have been a routine squash match, he wasn't deliberately trying to antagonize the Eliminator. What happened was, during the match, Bell, a veteran WWE enhancement talent, gave Saturn a hip toss that saw the one-time European champion take a bad bump onto his head and neck. Perry's bell was rung, so to speak, and so he entered into shoot mode, getting up and kicking and punching Bell before throwing him out of the ring. As Saturn explained later, he did this in order to create separation so he could compose himself, but regrettably, Bell himself took an ugly bump onto his head and neck. The match ended as planned and Perry was apologetic backstage, but was told in no uncertain terms that something like that was not to happen again. Some say the Moppy storyline was punishment. Amazingly, just months later, Perry also got into a scuffle with Brian Gamble at another Jacked taping after the rookie stopped selling and performing planned spots because he didn't want to lose in front of his friends and family. Once backstage, Gamble was thrown out of the arena before Saturn could throw him through a wall. Number 7, Diesel versus Pierre Carl Ouellet. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A Canadian wrestler doesn't want to lose in Montreal. Yes, just like Bret Hart, Pierre Carl Ouellet, then working as Jean-Pierre Lafitte, balked at doing the honors for WWE Champion Diesel when the two met on a September 15th, 1995 Montreal house show. He successfully got the finish changed to a double countout, much to the annoyance of Big Daddy Cool and the rest of the clique, and things came to a head when the two wrestled again the next night in Quebec City. Not only was Nash miffed that Ouellet got his way simply because he was a star in the province, but then he supposedly hurt the champ when performing a top rope leg drop. That was enough for Nash, who threw a bunch of live rounds in response, and the match devolved into some sort of semi-shoot until the jackknife powerbomb finish. The two continued brawling backstage, and needless to say, PCO's card was marked from then on, and he was gone from the promotion shortly after. 14 years later, Nash and the Pirate had squashed the beef and worked an angle resulting in a match in Montreal, which Ouellet won. Number 6, The Great Antonio versus Antonio Inoki. Though New Japan Pro Wrestling was built on real sports presentation that emphasized fighting spirit, the company was not averse to bringing in someone who didn't fit the traditional mold to serve as an attraction. And the Great Antonio, a ginormous Croatian-Canadian strongman famed for doing things like pulling cars by his hair and eating 25 chickens in one sitting, was certainly that. Christ, imagine him in a Nando's. The Great Antonio's reputation was such that he was booked against top star and New Japan founder Antonio Inoki in the main event of their December 8th, 1977 show. The Great Antonio, who had been beaten up by Karl Gotch and kicked off the tour for his conceited attitude during a previous tour of Japan, clearly hadn't learned his lesson and ended up getting a bad beating from the Chinster. The opening exchanges were weak and disjointed, and then, inexplicably, the Great Antonio stopped selling Inoki's offense while showboating. Then he started working too stiffly for Inoki's liking, and, well, things turned ugly from there. Inoki pelted the Great Antonio, took him down to the mat, and then pelted him some more, leaving him a bloody mess and unable to get up. Number 5, Hardcore Holly and Charlie Haas versus RENE DUPREE and KENZO SUZUKI. Bob Holly had a reputation for, from time to time, getting a little bit rugged with WWE's rookies. He famously beat up Matt Cappotelli during the second season of Tough Enough and would be the man programmed against young hopefuls such as Randy Orton when they got promoted to the main roster. Holly was not someone who suffered fools, gladly or otherwise, so you can imagine how thrilled he was when RENE DUPREE got a speeding ticket while driving a car that was rented in Bob's name. The French phenom neglected to tell the former hardcore champion, which eventually resulted in a big legal headache for old Sparky Plug. Bob was, shall we say, a little miffed about the whole thing and told DUPREE that his penance was coming and he better be prepared. And so, during a house show tag team title match, also featuring Charlie Haas and KENZO SUZUKI, Bob proceeded to batter RENE from pillar to post with shoot punches and kicks and a mean chair shot or two, sending RENE running backstage where the beatdown continued. Holly was fined for his actions, though expressed no remorse, while DUPREE claims he paid back the money Bombastic Bob lost because of the whole rental car deal and admitted that he was in the wrong. Number 4, YOSHIKO versus Act YASUKAWA. YOSHIKO versus Act YASUKAWA, former stablemates cum rivals, clashing over the World of Stardom Championship in a main event match should have been very good, but turned into one of the ugliest scenes ever witnessed in a pro wrestling ring. And that's because Yoshiko decided to go off script and assault her smaller opponent for real, which some reports said was an act of jealousy because Yasukawa had started to really gain in popularity. The match turned into a one-sided fight that left Yasukawa with multiple serious injuries, including a broken cheekbone, fractured facial bones, fractured orbital bone, a broken nose, and a concussion. The referee eventually stepped in and stopped the match, but it was too late and the damage was done. Yasukawa had to spend a couple of days in the hospital afterwards and was forced to sit on the sideline for months while she recovered. This was also coming after a 6-month injury layoff where she had almost gone blind, something Yoshiko was no doubt well aware of. YOSHIKO was stripped of her title, suspended indefinitely, and forced to take a pay cut as punishment. Sadly, after a few attempted comeback matches in December of 2015, YASUKAWA was forced to retire due to the injuries she sustained at the hands of YOSHIKO. She now works as a manager. Number 3, Charlotte Flair versus Nia Jax. The most interesting thing to happen on Raw in pretty much forever, Charlotte Flair and Nia Jax's match breaking down and the two slapping each other about legit was something that you simply couldn't take your eyes off. It's hard to tell exactly what happened when to get the Queen so ticked off, but she took a couple of awkward bumps courtesy of Jax, who has a reputation for sometimes being reckless with her opponent's safety. Charlotte threw out a few slaps and was pushing Nia, with the irresistible force warning her opponent, "Don't girl," while trying to paw her away. Then came the sandbagging and awkward exchanges where it looked like they were trying to maybe work through it but couldn't quite get their rhythm, and it continued to fall apart like a digestive biscuit in a cup of hot tea. It mercifully came to an end when Jax hit Flair with a very stiff-looking powerbomb. Reportedly, there was no further issue once the two got backstage, but they were clearly at odds in front of millions on Raw. Number 2, Andre the Giant versus AKIRA MAEDA. Right next to Brock Lesnar on the list of people I wouldn't want to hit me would be Andre the Giant. Especially a drunker-than-usual Andre, like the one that turned up to face AKIRA MAEDA for New Japan in 1986. Drunk Andre didn't play nice, but neither did AKIRA, a man with a reputation for being difficult to do business with if things didn't go his way. Before the match, neither man would agree to lose, but went to the ring with the understanding that the 8th wonder of the world would have his hand raised at the end of the night. According to legend, New Japan boss Antonio Inoki, who had had issues with AKIRA in the past, let Andre know that his opponent that night could use a little straightening out. Andre lumbered around and tried to swat his smaller opponent away, while AKIRA successfully completed a couple of takedowns and tried to wear the Giant down with some very painful leg kicks. It went on for an eternity, much to the bewilderment of the crowd. Eventually, Andre either got bored or realized that he needed another pint or 12 and laid down on the mat before signaling for AKIRA to cover him. Inoki stormed out and tried to get things going the way they should, but his presence infuriated AKIRA, who decided to walk out instead. The match was officially declared a no contest. Number 1, Brock Lesnar versus Braun Strowman versus KANE. The one person you probably don't want shooting on you is NCAA Division I heavyweight wrestling and former UFC Heavyweight Champion Brock Lesnar. While the next big thing's credentials speak for themselves and he could definitely manhandle just about any member of the roster at will, Brock's sports entertainment career has passed without him feeling the need to make an example out of an opponent. While Lesnar is a pro and won't go about beating people up for the thrill of it, he's also not about to take a stiff shot without handing back a receipt, which Braun Strowman found out at the 2018 Royal Rumble pay-per-view. The monster among men got a little overzealous in the triple threat WWE Universal Championship match with Lesnar and KANE, hitting the Beast Incarnate with a full-on knee to the side of the face. And that awakened something in Brock, who delivered a shoot punch to Braun's midsection, followed by another to the side of his noggin. Though Lesnar didn't strike with total force, he certainly did rock Strowman, sending him the message to slow down and refrain from hitting that hard from then on. While things certainly got tasty for a second, the match continued as normal, and the two brushed off the potatoes with a post-match laugh backstage.